Welcome to another episode of the Breakthrough Clinical Trials Lounge. I'm your host, Nyeleti Bicky Mthombeni. I'm the chosen voice of clinical trials in the African community. We continue the journey to amplify Africa's story, telling about the continent expertise when it comes to clinical trials, aiming to educate the community in Africa, to also advocate for more clinical trials to be done in Africa and showcase the experts that do clinical trials in Africa and those that want to bring more clinical trials in Africa. So today I'm joined by Peter. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Great. And you're from the Netherlands. I'm just happy to be speaking with you. Maybe you can tell us some bit more about yourself, about the Netherlands, and what is happening in the Netherlands currently.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So, as you said, my name is Peter Westerveld, based in the Netherlands, born and raised in the Netherlands. I'm very happy to be here to join this African-themed podcast. As you may see from my shirt with the zebras, I'm a big supporter of Africa. I've traveled quite a bit to Africa, South Africa, Mozambique, Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania, Namibia, different parts. So it's a beautiful place, lovely people. So very nice to be here. With regards to your question about the Netherlands, well, I think it's end of springtime. So what is very popular here in the Netherlands, I think also for tourists, you may have been exposed to that, is that now the tulip fields are coming at the end of the bloom, but they're still up and active, and it's one of the things that people visit here. So it's a lovely time, one of the best times to visit the Netherlands. Beautiful weather, tulip fields are in bloom. So that's the main things that are happening here right now.
Oh, okay, that's great. And it's like the opposite of South Africa currently. It's quite chilly,
Yes.
it's quite
Yes.
cold. We're in our
Yeah.
winter season, so it's really, really chilly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad to connect with you. I love the Netherlands. I've been to Amsterdam. I think I've been
Great.
to other parts of it. You know, it's like the infrastructure, the landscape. I actually visited the one of the biggest museum in the world, the Van Gogh. Am I pronouncing it right? I've been trying to practice it.
Van Gogh. I won't let you try that.
Oh,
That's difficult
okay, let
to
me try
pronounce.
Van
Van
Gogh.
Gogh.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Very good. Very good.
Yeah. Van Gogh Museum, you know, but I couldn't get in. I ended up in the garden sitting there, you know, but for me, that was just an experience. And I
Yeah.
think some stuff that I did there, I went to one of the historic town called Mukendam, Mukendam,
Oh, yeah. Monnikendam.
So it's,
Yeah, Monnikendam.
yeah,
Yeah.
Monnikendam. Yeah, and I
Mhm.
also got to go to another side of it. I think closer to Mokendam. It's called Kotwat. Me and my names, but I'm gonna put them here so that my audience can see. And I
See,
got
yeah.
to wear the clocks, and I just experimented a little bit with the historic culture of the Dutch. It was quite interesting. So
Nice.
I really, really enjoyed myself when I was there. And it's also good that you've traveled Africa. You seem to have a lot of experience about Africa. What did you like the most when you visited our continent?
Well, I think as my shirt shows, when I grew up, I think one of the reasons I actually studied biology is that I always wanted to be. Initially, when I was little, I wanted to be a nature photographer, and I was
Mm.
amazed with the nature documentaries about the Serengeti, the Kruger Park. You know, the wildlife and nature that you have is amazing. So that's one of the big drawing cards. And then visiting the countries, one of the things that I really appreciated is the mentality of the people. The hospitality is excellent. The music, the culture, it's very diverse and for me very interesting and very warming. Yeah, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really great. So maybe let's delve into it. Maybe a bit of a background about yourself when it comes to clinical trials and what you do currently. Maybe that can also help our audience around
Yeah,
Africa.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, not a problem. So I've been working in the clinical trials industry for almost 25 years. Started my career with an American company called Johnson & Johnson. So a pharmaceutical company, a company that makes medicine. And my job there was a CRA. So I think you've maybe explained that previously during one of your podcasts. CRA, or sometimes referred to as monitor. They are the people that go to the hospital to support the people at the hospital, to conduct the clinical research, to make sure everything's going right, to check for any mistakes and help correct them, so that really makes sure that the quality of the research is adequately addressed. So I did that for some time, and then I was a project manager, which is the person who oversees the project to make sure that the whole of the project is going well. And then I got into managing CRAs, so I really like working and coaching and mentoring people. So for a time I was also at another company. I was mentoring CRAs, training them, teaching them how to do the job properly, giving them coaching and guidance. That was also very nice to do. And then now for the last 13 years, I've worked with a company called Alimentive. Alimentive is a company that's focused on, on GI diseases. So we'll talk a little bit about that, what that is, I think, in a second. But so we're focused on doing research activities in that disease area. And my role within the company is to basically make sure that we have a network of investigators, what we call investigators, so researchers around the world that help us do all these very important clinical trials to help develop new treatments for patients with different types of GI diseases. So I've connected with, I think over the last 3 years, with almost 500 researchers around the world to discuss with them what type of research are they interested in, what type of patients do they see, and how can we collaborate together to do these clinical trials.
Yeah, that is quite interesting. So I think I've been in the industry as well for like 20 years. Actually, on exact dot 20 years that I've also, I think we kind of have a similar kind of experience.
Yes,
I had a bit of start at the regulator, then I joined and become a CRA as well, like we explained to you what the CRAs, the monitors do when they go to the research centers. And then from there, I also move into regulatory, working for different CROs. And I became a project manager. I think for the last time that I was full-time employed, I stayed in one company for like 7 years at the project management position, working across African countries and covering some European countries as well as a regional trial manager. So I also have a bit of extensive experience. But I think what I like about the reflection on the experience, it shows that for Africa specifically, because I know there's also a need to advocate for more work also in the Netherlands. But for Africa, it shows that if I have 20 years of experience, I'm sure there's multiple more people that have been doing this even for more years than me. It shows that it's a global way of doing things, and we can be able to do similar work in Africa and also in the European countries as well. So that's quite interesting that we share common experience. And you mentioned the GI. I want to break it down further.
Yes.
Reason being that in this podcast, we also speak to the community. And when I say the community, these are people with less knowledge when it comes to clinical trials, because we want the community in Africa to support clinical trials and not feel like clinical trials comes to take, but they need to understand that clinical trials also comes to change things. But maybe let's go back when you say GI, GI work, what exactly do you mean?
The philosophy of our company is GI is our why, because we focused on GI. So GI stands for gastroenterology. And the GI tract is a very important part of your body. It's basically the organs put together that process your food and that eliminate the waste. So basically starting from the mouth all the way through your stomach, the intestines or the gut, as some people call it, all the way to the rectum. So very important part of your body to process food, eliminate waste. And as you probably then understand, if there's any disease affecting those areas, that has a big impact on people. One of the disease areas we are doing a lot of research in called IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which is a chronic condition where people have inflammation of the larger intestines or sometimes the whole of the GI tract. And we work to find treatment solutions to that together with pharmaceutical companies. So you mentioned CRO, it stands for Clinical Research Organization. That's a company that's hired by a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company to help them do the clinical research. So pharmaceutical company or biotech company, they've developed to a very strong and validated process a new medication. And they obviously need to show that that drug is effective and that it's safe. And in order to do that, they need to do clinical trials, as you've explained very well on your podcast. And we then execute those trials. So we talk to investigators from hospitals. They approach the patients to take part in the clinical trials. We make sure that all the information, all the data is collected, that everything is overseen. So it's a very strong and regulated process that we implement to make sure the clinical trial is done efficiently. And for the GI diseases, that's our focus area. It's a very emerging market. There's a lot of research being done, and there's specific GI diseases in Africa and in South Africa, which are prevalent but becoming more prevalent. And I mentioned IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, that's really on the rise, likely due to a more Western diet or other environmental factors playing a role. So that's really on the rise in countries like South Africa, but also Northern Africa and other African countries, which is one of the reasons why we're doing more research in those areas to, first of all, do those clinical trials, but also because the number of patients that are would have access to is increasing in that region.
So further to break down this GI to other group of people that may needed to be like more specific. I recall was speaking to someone the other day, and you will help me here as well. So I said, for example, with the food, for example, when you eat, starting from when it gets into the mouth, it starts with the saliva in your mouth. That starts with breaking it down. And from breaking it down, it's not like we eat, obviously, the aim is to get the energy and all, but then the food, for it to end up being used as energy, it travels starting from the mouth, then it's broken down, and it gets to the stomach, if I may put it that way. Obviously, it's a long travel. And then there's also the intestines, which are the colons, and the ileum, am I right? So there's it goes into the intestine, and then in the intestine, basically after it has been broken down, the waste products are the ones that are then released through the rectum, as you've explained. And from what I know in the general population, especially when you talk about IBD, for example, because I think there's many people that live with this condition without knowing that there are even conditions. Although we're not going to go much into detail, because that is also another podcast on its own when we want to teach about the whole gastro subject. But just to break it further, maybe we can look at what are some of the symptoms, especially like what are some of things that people should look out for. Because I mean, I had so many cases recently of people sometimes having colorectal cancer, like colon cancer, and they don't understand where does it begin. Obviously, we don't understand maybe the causes of many diseases, but just to explain some symptoms like IBD, when you talk about irritable bowel disease, what are some of the symptoms that people should look for?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm not a doctor, so probably maybe there's medical people that can explain this better to me, but you said irritable bowel syndrome, so maybe that's good to clarify. That's a different condition where it's more that people are susceptible, that it triggers certain things in their intestines. So, but any, I think GI disease area, you're spot on. That there's a bit of a taboo, right? It's not like in a social conversation at a birthday party or something. People won't talk about how many times they go to the bathroom during a day. So I think for a person, it's sometimes quite difficult to assess what is normal. But specifically for inflammatory bowel disease, so this chronic disease where you have inflammation of the bowel, the symptoms you see is diarrhea or blood in your feces, so in your poo. If you have something like that, if you have cramps, many people have fatigue. So different types of them, but definitely if you have blood anywhere in your stool, I think you should always see a doctor. It's not normal. I think you should always go to your GP or what the standard practice is in your country. Please visit a doctor. And like you said, many people live with some diseases for a long time. I mean, I've heard examples, celiac disease. Maybe it's not so common in South Africa, but I think it's common in Northern Africa more also. It's a disease where people cannot eat gluten. Gluten is a protein that is in different types of products, but mainly barley and rye, so grain products. And some people have a disease called celiac disease, where if they are digesting food that contains this protein, that their body thinks it's a foreign protein and it should be attacked by your immune system, so your defense system of your body. So some people, they don't know and they think they have these symptoms when they eat, but they just think it's normal because, like I said, it's not always so normal for people to talk to somebody else and say, oh, I have stomach pain, I have cramps, I have diarrhea. So people, maybe for a long time, I've heard some stories of people that have suffered with this type of disease for 10, 20 years before they were actually diagnosed and confirmed that they have the disease. So hopefully there's not too much of a hurdle of people to see their doctor. It's not, let's say, normal if you go to the bathroom for 5 or 6 times a day very urgently, also urgency. So how quickly can you wait to go to the bathroom, or you have to go very quickly? So if you have to go quickly to the bathroom, if you have blood in your stool, if you have a lot of diarrhea, that's definitely a sign that you should see a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm glad we're bringing this subject. Obviously, we're not gonna go further into it. Like you say, we just more focused on research, but there are medical doctors that work specifically in gastro that people must approach, and people must just get to know that there are these conditions, and sometimes it's not necessarily just to be left unattended. So it's necessary for people to be aware about that. But going back again into clinical trials, I'm going to get a little controversial here when it comes to doing trials in Africa specifically, because people they think, for example, the global world is coming into Africa, for example, to conduct trials. So I often ask myself, like, okay, it's important to show people that even countries that are more developed than many of the African countries, like Netherlands, also does clinical trials. So why do you think it's important for people in Africa to consider participating in clinical trials?
Yeah, I think participating in a clinical trial gives a patient a unique opportunity to contribute to the development of a new medication. So I think what you see is that also in my country, and I think my country maybe even more so, because let's say the commercial options, so the products that are already available in the hospital, in pharmacy, there's a large number of them. And for example, for IBD, I think there's almost 10 or maybe more than 10 now approved medications for this disease. So if you're a patient and you are asked to participate in the clinical trial, a lot of it is about what you call altruism, right? Doing something to help another person. So that's a big deciding factor. But I think it can be very rewarding. I think for a patient that you can tell later on to people, hey, I've worked on that clinical trial and now it's a new medication, it's helping people, so you contributed. So that's one of the reasons why I hope people will participate. Another thing is that it's about diversity. That's very, very important. There's a large underrepresentation, so not enough people from African background, Asian background, also female background, to be honest, that are taking part in clinical trials. And that's a big problem because obviously then it takes longer to do the clinical trial because the less people are participating, the longer it takes. But it's also a problem because you want to show that your medication works in everybody. Well, not everybody, but as many people, diverse people as possible. There's a lot of research that shows that some medication, yes, they work in Western European people, but they don't work in African people. So the genetic part is very, very in the background. It's very important. So yeah, hopefully people will participate, and maybe because it's a little bit more new concept than it is in my country, in the Netherlands. Maybe people have some anxiety and some fear because it's something that they don't know, and I think many people, if they don't know something, they get afraid of it, which is understandable. So hopefully by doing these things, which I think is great that you're doing this, by educating people, providing them with the facts and information, they hopefully are more comfortable taking part in a clinical trial.
Okay, so basically you're saying that when it comes to the population in the Netherlands, they're more receptive of joining clinical trials.
Yeah. I think overall they're less, say, afraid of taking part in a clinical trial. It's already happening, I think, for a longer period of time, and we have some very large academic hospitals which are famous for doing research. So if you're a patient and you go to especially these academic hospitals, you're not surprised if you're asked to participate in research. It's almost standard. It can be a clinical trial, but sometimes it can also just be observational. It doesn't mean you get medication, but they just collect some additional information for you for research. So a lot of people, they know and they almost expect that to happen. Yeah.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And the academic institutions are the institution where they mostly train healthcare professionals.
Yeah, so maybe that's good to explain. So academic institution is a hospital that is connected to a university. So it's where doctors are trained to become doctors, but it's also a place where a lot of research is being done. And then that research is published in journals across the world, so that other doctors can read those researches and learn from it, and hopefully apply it to their practice. Yeah.
And you also mentioned something very important. You said it's not only for treatment; it can also be observational.
Yeah.
And maybe we can reflect on that, because if we're to think of what we touched on earlier on with irritable, the IBD, like for example, let's say you want to learn something, that can be more of an observational research. Maybe we can break it down further, like if you went to inform our audience that it's not always about the treatment, what would you say is observational research?
Yeah, so observational is where you don't, or we sometimes call it non-interventional, which also may be a complicated term, but it basically means that you don't really change the normal treatment of the patient, but you are collecting some additional information. And these type of studies are done quite a lot when a product is, for example, already approved to be used on the market. So it's gone through the different phases of the clinical research. It's going to the market. It can be used for the patients, but they want to collect some more information. So, for example, some long-term information about the safety of the product. So, what happens to the patients after taking the drug for 1 or 2 or even longer periods of time, but also maybe to fully understand on different times and symptoms how the patient is doing. So, collecting additional information, that's done quite a lot. So it's a clinical trial, and research is not always about giving medication to a patient and seeing what happens. It's sometimes just also about really looking at patients that are going through their normal treatment and collecting additional information.
Okay. I think that really helps a lot, because people need to be aware of that as well. And even healthcare professionals and researchers in different African countries also needs to be aware that they can actually do observational research in their platforms without necessarily having to wait for international companies. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think it's also a good way for researchers to start their research career. It's not so easy to start, obviously, with a clinical trial. It can be quite complex with giving medication and all that, a lot of paperwork. But it maybe start by doing some basic research or academic research with more observational studies that can be a good starting point. Yeah.
Okay. And there was something that you touched on when you talked about the treatment, but anyway, but for now, maybe let's break it down a little bit further. I was looking at the number of clinical trials specifically in Europe versus the number in Africa, and I wanted to also give it into more perspective. Like, for example, Africa is about 54 countries, and they only have like 20,000 trials. I didn't break them further into observational, non-observational, and all that, or interventional, non-interventional, and that is like a fraction of the trials that are happening in the world. And when we look at Europe, for example, they're sitting at about 167,000, but I only just use one database, clinicaltrials.gov, to get this information. And I further went down to look at what is recorded in the clinicaltrials.gov for Netherlands, and you could see they're sitting at about 10,000 of trials that are registered. And this, I think I went further to look and remove the observational, because I think overall it was showing me about 14,000.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And if you were to say, you compare what is happening in the Netherlands, which is a country of 18 million people, and you look at Africa with 54 countries with close to 1.4 billion people, and there's only about 20,000 clinical trials. And I like your role. I looked you up on LinkedIn. You say you are basically advocating for more research in the world. So what can Africa do? What can African countries do based on what you've seen, especially when you've been going to these different countries, speaking to different specialists? What is it that they can do in order for us to get into research? I mean, you already explained some of the key benefits of participating in research. What do you think we can do better?
Yeah, that's a very, very good and important question. So I think you mentioned the fact that you previously also worked in a regulatory position. So maybe to explain, there's an approval process for a clinical trial to be conducted in a country or in a hospital, and there's some senior people, medical people with strong research backgrounds that review the protocol, so how the study will be conducted, and then make sure everything is correctly done and then approved to be done in the country or in the hospital. So that's an important part of the trials. And I think for Africa, I think it's very important, and many countries, they have already the strong process in place, that there's a very clear process for getting approval from the authorities, from the regulators to do a clinical trial, so that there's really documented oversight of the activities, because it's an important industry, but there's patients being involved, so the safety and well-being of the patients really need to be respected and protected. So there needs to be a strong process to oversee and review that, but also a quick process. There's a lot of incentives when you're developing a medication. Maybe that's good. I'm not sure if you explained that in previous podcast. If you want to develop a new medication in a disease area, you register for a patent. A patent means that you can only develop this medicine, and you own this product, and nobody else can develop it. So it's really your own. It's your property. But that only lasts for 20 years, depending on the region. So you have limited time to develop your drug, and then once it's hopefully working, then you can sell it, and usually you only have, let's say, 10 years remaining on your patent to sell the drug. So there's a lot of push to do these research activities as quickly as possible. So obviously, for us as a company, when we work with the pharmaceutical companies, we prefer to work with countries that start the trial as quickly as possible, so that they have the opportunity to enroll the patients, so our patients join the study as quickly as possible. So that's very, very important, that there's a clear regulatory process and that it's a fast process. That's one. I think from the investigator side, I think it's important that they really make sure that they have a good infrastructure to do the clinical trials, that they're trained, that they have set up their resources. So they need some administrative support, some people to do the administrative tasks, the nurses to do the nurse part of the job. So that's also very important, that they have this infrastructure. And there I think it's good to note, because sometimes people ask me, say, Peter, I really want to do clinical trials, but I don't know where to start. I'm a young gastroenterologist in our field. I would like to do this, but then they can also work with companies like Alimentive and many others that can help them provide support. So maybe that we can, for a study, assign an external person to help with the administrative part. So I think it's also about collaborating together and understanding that there are people like myself and others that you can reach out to and connect and say, hey, can we talk about this? And I really would like to be involved. I think that's the only way we can have new people join the clinical trials, because obviously you mentioned clinicaltrials.gov. There's a lot of data and information about, and we have a lot of information within the company about gastroenterologists and how many trials they have participated in, how many patients they've enrolled. But obviously we have no data on people that are new. The data doesn't exist yet. So that's very important, that we connect with them. And I think that's why also personal relationships are very important. I talk a lot to experienced investigators, then they recommend other people. So for me as an investigator, it's also, I would suggest to them, make sure that you do your training, try to see if you can build the infrastructure so that you have the people in your research unit, and then build your network. So talk to senior gastroenterologists, make sure that they know who you are, that you have an interest, so that we can all collaborate and build a community together.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that
then
is a
and then in Africa, I think in general, I think in general the industry and also the part of the industry that I work in, they really see the opportunities in Africa. They see the emerging countries that are there. There's a lot more hospitals, a lot more doctors getting involved in clinical research. The regulators are doing a good job in building better processes and having quicker approvals. So I think a lot of positive things are happening. And now, hopefully, that should lead to results. And then the more we get the results, the more positive experience we have, and we can share with different people and have more trials come to Africa.
Mm. Hmm. That was a mouthful, but just to summarize a bit, so you have the regulator that if their systems and their processes and their time is not competitive compared to the rest of the world, then they will also affect the number of trials that get into the country. Then we have the research infrastructure. Do we have the infrastructure to do the particular research that needs to happen? Like, for example, you say in academic institution as an example. So let's say we were to look at one of the academic institution in Tanzania as an example. Do they have research infrastructure? That is another element of it, where maybe the government of those countries can also play a role to ensure that they build research infrastructure. Then you also mentioned experience of the researchers, that there's no new, much new researchers that are coming into play as well. And you mentioned that they can start by looking out others, experienced researchers that they can partner with in order for them to get into research. So I'm also quite interested, especially with the regulator, because I mean, we're advocating, maybe one of the regulators in Africa is listening to our conversation. So it's quite interesting. So the regulators must also be like a party or a partner to ensure there is development. I wonder why it does take so long. But my experience, especially with European countries, for example, do you submit to one portal for regulatory approval, or do you have multiple countries submitting to their own different regulator? Do you all submit through EMA, as an example? Or the Netherlands submit to the Netherlands drug authority, Belgium has their own drug authority, because in Africa, I know we're building towards AMA. We heard of the African Medicines Authority, but I mean, there's still multiple countries with their own regulators. So what is your experience when it comes to this? The regulatory framework, especially in Europe, not much in Africa, because I think that we've touched on in other discussions.
No, but that's an interesting development that you're saying that hopefully in the future will be a central approval process for Africa. I think that's a great development, because we changed the process already quite some time ago in Europe. Before, you had to submit to each country individually. So you had to submit all your documentation to the Netherlands, to France, Germany, all separate submissions. And now there's a central European submission for countries that are part of the European Union. So that's one central process, and then following that you get approval to conduct the study. And I think that's very interesting, especially also for countries like myself. You mentioned that we only have 18 million people, so we have a small country. So that also makes sure that smaller countries may hopefully participate more in clinical trials, because if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're doing a clinical trial and you say, okay, let's have a look which hospitals could participate, but there's only one hospital that is possible to participate in the Netherlands, maybe the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company, will say, well, that's not worthwhile, all the trouble, all the documentation, all the work for one site. But now they submit centrally to all European countries at the same time. And then that's less of a problem. And hopefully that will also apply to Africa as well. So, and it will save time and people at the side of the person doing that's the submission. That's the sponsor. They have to submit this dossier, this documentation. So I think it's very positive development. So I would love to hear more about that from you, either in this podcast or maybe in the future, about how that process would work in Africa.
Yeah, it's a developing process. I mean, I'm sure, because I mean, when it comes to medicines regulations, there's multiple areas. There's manufacturing, there's registration, there's surveillance, and I mean, obviously, the clinical trials is also an aspect of it. So I know that there's a lot of drive when it comes to manufacturing currently, and everything also being communicated through this new centralized body armor. But we'll see how it will progress when it comes to clinical trials. But for now, I know for all countries, if you want to do the study in Tanzania, in South Africa, in Uganda, you still have to go through the submission. And I like how they reflected about it, because I mean, we've seen in Africa, countries like South Africa, they continue to have much percentage of trials, higher percentage of trials versus other countries. Also, South Africa and Egypt, if you go to the FDA website, you will see that they are basically taking majority of the trials. Then you have some countries that have not even had one single interventional trial happening. Your explanation about how a sponsor can look at it and say, no, Netherlands, only 18,000 people, 80 million people, maybe it's not worthwhile if there's just one research center there. And you have to go through this dossier with so many documentation and the whole requirement to set up a trial site. I think that is really quite key. And I hope that the regulator is listening and they can prioritize clinical trials as well as they move in with this new armor body as well. But I mean, you also talk about diversity earlier on. I just also saw some quite interesting information about diversity and inclusion of different racial groups or ethnic groups into research. Like I saw, there's this report that the FDA published in most cases, clinical trials snapshot. So the 2024 report basically does show that there's still about 4% of trials being done, including Black people as an example, and the Asian people, it's also it's still less and stuff like that. So if we were to look if you think about GI, for example, and some of the conditions where, like when you look in the epidemiology data, there is an increasing risk or numbers of GI-related conditions in Africa, and it's projected to increase over the years. How do we advocate? I know what can we do? I understand that there are challenges with regard to what we highlighted earlier on. There is experience. I'm an example of the experience that is out there, and many of the other researchers that you worked with. What can we do to move the numbers up? What can we do to move? Because I mean, these medicines, for example, will end up in our shelves. And some medicines we've learned that we only get to know them better once they're in the shelf, because if you're not part of research, then the data that is used may not necessarily show efficacy for other ethnic groups when it's in the market. So how do we do more as the African, or how do other companies or global sponsors take that risk? Can you tell them, can you advise them to take the risk and say, Africa is ready?
I'll do my best to answer that question from my personal perspective. I think you touched about the diversity, very important point. I think from a let's say scientific point of view, like I explained, you want to know if your new drug or what you're developing works in different types of people with different genetic, different backgrounds, different racial backgrounds. So that's very important, because what you don't want to do is test the medication mainly on white people, Caucasian people, and then later administer that same drug to people with black skin, with different background, and then find out later on that that drug doesn't work because the genetics makes it different. So that's very important. But I think also from an ethical point of view, all people across the world should have access to different treatments and to clinical trials. I think especially in countries like, well, African countries where generally, compared to Western countries, the access to newer treatments is less. So it provides people with an opportunity to have access to newer medication, which I think ethically is a appropriate thing to do, in my personal opinion. So I think that's, but I think there's also a lot of opportunities. You mentioned, it's interesting, the numbers are quite staggering, right? When you look at the Netherlands, Europe, how many trials are being conducted. So that's great. But for us, as the industry, it also presents a problem, because now if we want to develop a new medication with one of our sponsors and they say, oh, let's go do this trial in the Netherlands, Germany, France. And then we go to the investigators, the researchers, they say, sorry, we're too busy. We have so many clinical trials ongoing. We just don't have the patients or the people in the hospital to do the trials. So it's also an opportunity, I think, for Africa to be more involved. I think there's a need to have more investigators involved. And I really liked what our chief medical officer said once. He said it's not so much that the patients are not there in inflammatory bowel disease or other indications. We need more investigators also. So we need more researchers. So hopefully this podcast can help raise awareness in amongst patients. So I think it's really great that you're also targeting the population, the regular population, normal civilians that just want to learn about clinical trials. So that's great. But hopefully it will also reach doctors and researchers, so that there really is a need for more people to do research, and hopefully regulators and governments will allow them to do that research. Because as you said, if you're a doctor, if you're a nurse, if you work in a hospital, I think many of us probably realize that that's one of the busiest jobs in the world. There's a lot of pressure. I visited some hospitals, not in South Africa yet, which I'm hoping to do in September, but many other places where just there's queues of patients at the hospital. There's so much pressure on these doctors to just help so many people at the same time. So anything that the regulators can do, but that also we can do from the industry to make it as easy as possible to them to do a clinical trial, that would be very helpful. And I hope we, from Alimentive side, we can also contribute to that.
Okay. All right. That is quite great. That there has to be that consideration. I think it's for us as African experts, I will call us that, to continue with the advocacy and creating more visibility to showcase that we do have the infrastructure, we do have the experts. And with your drive into GI, especially, I was quite. It's quite interesting when I started getting more interested also into GI, finding out that there's less specialist gastroenterologists in Africa. So your drive, because you've been working with gastros in Africa and you're building more networks and stuff. Is it easy to get them to want to be part of trials?
Yeah, I think overall it's people are very interested in it. I think if you're a doctor or a nurse, you learn about the human body, about disease areas from your studies. So you have, I would expect, a normal or basic interest in this type of education, and I think it's always interesting to learn new things, right? So clinical trials and clinical research, that's really where the new things are happening in medicine. So it's really an opportunity to learn more and be part of developing new treatments, understanding better the disease. So I think it's I think what people tell me, very rewarding experience if you're a doctor or a nurse or working in a hospital. Yeah. And like we said before, also I think for a patient, I think it's quite cool that you can tell your friends, like, okay, you know about this medication for inflammatory bowel disease, yeah. Well, people are experiencing good results, and I was part of the research that helped to that. I was one of the participants, so maybe it seems like a small contribution, but overall it's a big contribution, because people taking a time away from their job to take part in the clinical trial, they're trying something new, which can be quite maybe a little bit scary, but yeah, I think it's quite exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, our time is also flying. I mean, it's quite interesting. It's like we can continue for another
Yeah.
2 hours or so. But I mean, do you
Yeah.
have anything that you may want to ask me before we come to the end of our discussion today?
No, I don't have a question for yet, but before we close, I mentioned a little bit that I'll be visiting Cape Town in September. So there's the World Endoscopy Conference there, ENDO 2026. So you talked about raising awareness. So one of the things we're doing there is that I will be giving a presentation there together with an investigator, so a researcher who's done a lot of clinical trials. And we'll also have 2 patient speakers. So what we wanted to do is raise awareness from different sides of a clinical trial. So I will be presenting on behalf of the CROs and the sponsors, so the people who develop the study. Then the investigator, the researcher, will talk about what is it like to do research, what are some of the challenges, but also why is it such a nice thing to be an investigator. And then the patients will share their open experience, so frank experience, what's it like to participate in a clinical trial practically as a patient. So I think hopefully if people are interested in that, then they can let me know, and maybe they can either join the meeting, or we can make a recording, or we can share later in one of your podcasts as well. So
I think
that's my shameless plug. Sorry for that. But then I do have a question for you, Nyeleti. So you talk. It's interesting. You talked about perceptions, right? And you visited the windmills and the clocks in the Netherlands. And I think people realize that not everybody in the Netherlands lives in a windmill and wears clocks. But so what? From if I would ask you, what is one of the most general misconceptions that people have about South Africa or Africa?
in general, not research related.
No, in general, maybe, or
Oh,
maybe related to
yeah.
research, maybe.
No, in general, people think Africa is backward. You know, you have I'll actually, let me give you a real life experience. I recall one time I had auditors prior to 2010. You know, South Africa hosted the World Cup in 2010.
Yes, yes,
So just prior to 2010, I think before the World Cup started, the Soccer World Cup started. So I had 2 auditors, I can't recall, coming from European countries, and I was driving around with them, taking them in KwaZulu-Natal, which is one other province, and we're driving around Durban. And they easily said, "Oh, we can see the roads. Were they built when they were preparing for the World Cup?" So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, there's lots of advancement here. I mean, I think some of our countries or our cities are even comparable to some of the other countries in the world, you know. So
For
it's
sure, for sure.
yeah, we very much advanced technology. We may have glitches there and there, but I think it happens everywhere. Where we live, the lifestyle that we lead. And I think we're quite advanced. Africa is quite advanced, and it can actually, it operates in the global community.
Certainly. Yeah.
I think that's just an example that I can show to show how people think it's still underdeveloped, but it's not that. Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
a great example. Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate. There's a lot to learn when it comes to research, and I mean we need more of these kind of platforms. And I'm looking forward to making plans to meet at the endoscopy conference. And I really like what you just highlighted with what you will be sharing. Maybe we can discuss further on how we can broadcast it. We recently had conference with TCIS Summit, or Clinical Trials Investigator Summit. And when we were there, we were literally recording snippets of what was happening so that we can be able to share in bits and pieces of what was happening. Because you know what I want to highlight, in most cases, when we go to these conferences, we kind of speak with ourselves in the room. You know, you understand what I mean? It's yeah, how do we take the message? And that's why I started this podcast as well. You know, try to take the message outside of our confined space of researchers, doctors, you know, and how do we even, what I also seen, we don't get lots of coverage in the sense of media and news coverage, you know, normal news, not in our scientific journals and stuff like that. So we have to create that those kind of platforms for us so that our message can go there, so that we can inform as many people as possible, not just our smaller cycle where everything is happening. So yeah.
I fully agree. I think there's a large underrepresentation of objective information, so clear information, factual information about clinical trials in the world. I think people have a certain perception, which is, I would say, generally not accurate. If I go to a birthday party or family meeting and people ask me about clinical trials, people have a certain perception, which is not correct. So I think it's great what you're doing, and happy to support any activities. Yeah.
Okay, we'll connect more about the Endos conference, and maybe we can connect with the organizers to see how we can make it happen. Yes. But thank you very much. If you're in the Netherlands, you're somewhere in Europe, subscribe and share, because we want to spread the message. We want you to see that Africa is capable. And if you want to join the podcast, you can also connect with me. I'll share my contact details as well. But thank you very much, Peter. It was really great.
You're very welcome, and I think you're clearly showing that Africa is more than just zebras. So,
yeah, right. But like the zebras, please come to see our zebras.
Yes. Will do. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.